Hey guys, how's it going? UG here, and today I've got a Rep Paladin PvP guide. But this guide's gonna be a bit different from most of my guides. I'm gonna be going over the basics of Rep Paladin, just so the people who are either, just straight up new to the game or new to Rep Paladin can have a kind of good idea on what it's supposed to do, what you're supposed to do on the class, just all those kinds of things. So what I'm doing is, first off, I'm just going to talk about the class, just kind of what it does. Then I'm going to get into the talents, then covenants, then your rotation, then talking about some important abilities, and then some conduits, legendaries, and a few other things at the end. I'll have timestamp on the screen probably if you just want to check out specific parts. You can click on those. But yeah, let's get into it. So what is Rep Paladin? Rep Paladin is a kind of bursty hybrid melee DPS, I'd say. It's not the tankiest class in the game. It does have some very powerful defensive cooldowns, the main one being Divine Shield. Divine Shield is a cooldown that's on a 5-minute cooldown that makes you immune to everything for 8 seconds. This defensive cooldown is insanely powerful. The only problem with it is it's a really long cooldown unless you use talent into it, and even then it's still a pretty long cooldown. Other than that, your main form of defensives is a shield called Shield of Vengeance. It shields you for around 50% of your health, and then when it expires, it explodes and it can do crazy large damage, but the damage is split up between each target that is hit by it. Try to stand near one person when it pops so it doesn't split onto multiple targets. And then other than that, you have Blessing of Protection, which is an ability that's on the same cooldown of Divine Shield. However, it only makes you immune to physical damage. Also, it can be purged off, so it's not as reliable as Divine Shield. The big benefit of it, however, is you are able to use it on your teammates. And the last form of defensives you have is just self-healing. You can either cast heals with Flash of Light, or you can spend Holy Power to heal. Now is a good time to talk about Holy Power. So, Ret's rotation is trying to rotate through as much Holy Power as possible. All of your abilities cost 3 Holy Power, but you can have a total of 5. This Holy Power can be spent in 3 different ways unless you talent into certain things. Templar's Verdict, Divine Storm, and Word of Glory. Word of Glory is an instant heal, which heals for a significant amount, can be cast on yourself and on allies. Divine Storm is an AoE ability that hits everyone around you for a small chunk of damage. And then lastly, there is Templar's Verdict. Hits for more damage to Divine Storm, but a single target. Now let's talk about Rep Paladin's mobility. Rep Paladin's mobility isn't the best. You don't really have any crazy good gap closers like a warrior with charge and leap or a rogue with shadow step. All you really have is Divine Steed, which pretty much makes you mount for 3 seconds and lets you run to the target really fast. This is actually pretty efficient when you pair it up with your other mobility ability, which is Blessing of Freedom. When used on yourself or an ally, makes the target immune to all slows and roots and also gets them out of all slows and roots that they are currently in. It lasts for 8 seconds, but it can be purged. It's kind of hard to make Divine Steed work a lot of the times without pairing it with Freedom because it's way less effective. Whenever you're slowed, you're really not going to be going much faster than you would be normally. Try to pair it with that or use it when you're not slowed. Now, as for CC, Rep Paladin baseline only has 1 CC ability, and that is Hammer of Justice. It's on a minute cooldown, and it's a stun that lasts for 6 seconds. However, it is a magic effect, so it can be dispelled by healers. After that, Rep Paladin has a number of utility uses. I mentioned a few earlier. Blessing of Freedom, you can cast on your allies and makes them immune to slows and roots for a period of time. And there is Blessing of Protection, which you can also cast on an ally and makes them immune to all physical damage for a number of time, but both of them can be purged. You have 2 other forms of utility, one being Blessing of Sacrifice. You cast it on an ally and it reduces the damage they take by 30%, but you suffer 75% of the damage that is reduced on that target. This can be a positive and a negative. You can use this when you're getting cross-CC'd by an enemy. You can cast it on your ally, and if they cast something like Polymorph or something that will break on damage, when your ally receives damage who has Blessing of Sacrifice, the damage transferred to you will break you out of the CC, which can be really helpful in certain situations. Or you can just straight up use it as a damage mitigation, like what it's supposed to be used as. This is actually a pretty powerful ability, especially when you use it correctly. Then the last ability would be Cleanse Toxins. Cleanse Toxins is just an ability or removes poisons and diseases from the target that is dispelled. This is a pretty niche ability. It's only good into certain classes. The main one, in my opinion, is against Shadow Priests, since you can dispel their Devouring Plague, which is a large portion of their damage. So yeah, that's about it for Ret Paladin utility. Next, just kind of talking about the playstyle. So Ret Paladin's whole thing is doing really big damage in burst windows. Ret Paladin has some of the scariest bursts in the game. However, it is also some of the most predictable bursts in the game. So the whole game plan of Ret Paladin is trying to either burst them so fast that they can't press their cooldowns, or catch them without their cooldowns while you have your burst up. Ret Paladin has kind of a mini burst window every minute, but its really big burst window, which is Avenging Wrath, is on a 2-minute cooldown. Outside of your burst windows, your kind of whole deal is either staying alive by spam healing yourself or teammates with wogs or flash of lights, not so much flash of lights, or just trying to get as much pressure out as possible to try to force those defensive cooldowns before your next burst window comes out. Right now, Ret Paladin's consistent damage isn't terrible. They usually can't kill. They usually can't really kill a target, but they definitely do enough damage to do significant pressure outside of their cooldowns. And depending on whatever you're playing with, you still can kill outside of your cooldowns. However, it is quite a bit harder. Now that I've kind of described what Ret Paladin is, let's talk about the talents. So for the most part, your talents are going to stay somewhat the same. For tier 15, 90% of the time you're going to be using Zeal. The other two just aren't that good right now. They're both nerfed in Arena to the point where they're really not worth running. Next is tier 2. Only one worth using is Blade of Wrath, because both the other ones are just based around using Crusader Strike more, and Crusader Strike is not very helpful. So getting the increased chance of Blade of Wrath, that also increases damage, is really nice, since it's your main holy power generator. Now, tier 30, it kind of just depends on what comp you're playing. For the most part, you're going to get Fist of Justice, but if you need Repentance, you go Repentance. If you need Binding Light, you go Binding Light. It just kind of depends on what comp you're playing. If you're playing something that has a ton of stuns, Blind or Rip are good. Next is the 35 tier. This one just varies depending on what comps you're playing against. Against most melee cleaves, you're going to want to go Eye for an Eye. And then against caster cleaves, you're either going to want to go Unbreakable Spirit or Cavalier. Cavalier is good if you're playing in something that you really need to keep up with, and the extra Divine Steed is really gonna help you catch up to them. It's only really good into things that aren't gonna be perma-slowing you all game, since Divine Steed is pretty useless outside of Freedom if you are getting slowed the entire game. And Unbreakable Spirit's just good overall. Reduce the cooldown on your wall, reduce the cooldown on your bubble, makes it so that longer games are a lot easier. 40 and 50 kind of go together, so let's talk about 45 first. 45, for the most part, you're going to want to go Healing Hands every game. Selfless Healer has potential, but I think Healing Hands is just overall still way better, even though it's significantly nerfed in Arena. I think it's 50% in Arena? I'm not 100% sure though. Selfless Healer, the only annoying thing about it is if you're getting perma-purged, you're really not going to get much value out of it. All it's going to end up being is just extra buff for them to purge. So maybe usable if you're playing Orisa Druid, but for the most part, the overall healing from Healing Hands is just better. Now, lastly, let's talk about 40 and 45. So it's kind of just a combination of Divine Purpose, Seraphim, Final Reckoning, and Sanctified Wrath. For the most part, you're not going to run these two together, but they are not terrible. It's just the other combinations kind of do what you're trying to do with it better. The only really big use of this is you have a really long burst cooldown. Maybe you can hold Seraphim for the end of your wings and catch them kind of off guard if they pop their defensive immediately after seeing wings. But for the most part, you'll pair Seraphim with Final Reckoning. This just has a ton of burst damage. The only problem is it's very, very predictable because you have to press Seraphim a global before you actually burst, so it gives them ample time to actually react to it. But the burst damage that you get from it is absolutely insane, especially when you pair with Divine Toll. You're going to be hitting crazy numbers, so sometimes it being predictable just doesn't really matter. The next one is with Divine Purpose. Divine Purpose, Final Reckoning. It gives you good consistent damage, good healing. You also have a pretty good burst window with Final Reckoning. This is the general spec that you can play into pretty much anything. Build is really good into things that you either have to burst down very, very quickly, or things that you have pretty good setup for. So maybe if you're playing Ret Rogue or Ret Hunter, or maybe if you're playing Ret Mage, just something that you have a lot of setup and you can really lock down a target and burst one target down really hard, because Seraphim just forces cooldowns on its own. So Divine Purpose plus Final Reckoning is kind of just my go-to talent choice, and then I kind of just change it around depending on what I'm playing against. You know, sometimes I'll go Seraphim, or sometimes I'll go Sanctified Wrath. But this is just what I go overall, because it's really good, has really good consistent damage. You get really good off-healing chances with the Divine Purpose procs, and then you still have really good burst with Final Reckoning. And you know, if you get a Divine Purpose proc during your Final Reckoning burst, it's crazy good damage. This is just my overall current favorite build right now, so if you just don't really know what to run, just play this and you'll be totally fine. You can get super high rated with this. Another one that works kind of like this is Sanctified Wrath. The only problem with Sanctified Wrath is it's hard to run with something like a Hunter or a Rogue, because you know, you're gonna be breaking saps and traps and things like that with the Sanctified Wrath procs. It's better for melee cleaves, so like Ret Warrior, because you get the extra AoE damage, you also get the increased wings duration. It's just overall really good, especially with Ret Warrior. I recommend running this build or this build if you're playing that comp. Seraphim, maybe if you're playing like with a Necro Warrior, you just literally want to blow someone up. Now that's about it for the talents. You know, most of them aren't really changing. The only ones that really change are 40, 50, and 35. And I guess 30 depending on your comps. For the most part, you're gonna want to go Fist of Justice. Next, let's talk about PvP talents. So for the most part, you're always gonna be Sank, Blessing of Sanctuary. It's just incredible into almost every single comp, unless you're playing against certain specific things that are gonna be able to cover you perfectly for every single opportunity. Then Orb of Reckoning is kind of similar. It gives you wings procs outside of your initial goes. And then if you can time it correctly, you can sometimes get it to line up with your second burst. They did nerf it quite a bit in 9.1, so it doesn't proc as often. But against certain things, it still procs super fast, like against Windwalkers or BM Hunters, because they have so many pets and things that can just rack up the stacks for you. It's just a really good talent. It's good defensively, it's good offensively. You can just sometimes win the game automatically just because of it proccing, just at a random point where they're in trouble. But yeah, it's just really good. You're gonna wanna run it pretty much every game. Then your third option is kind of up to you. It depends on what you're playing against. Luminescence is a really good one, especially if you're playing with, you know, a hunter that has pets, or maybe if the rest of shamans, since they're also gonna be doing a lot of damage. Just giving the entire team an extra 4% increased damage is really helpful, you know, because if you add it up, you know, if you're playing with a hunter pet and maybe with a R shaman, you got yourself, which is 4, your hunter, which is another 4, the pet, which is another 4, and then the R shaman, which is another 4. So that's like 16% overall increased damage for your team. So yeah, it's not really that bad. I'm not actually sure how well it stacks with a hunter, because I know that the hunter pets get the buff, but I don't know, you know, how much it actually matters. But yeah, Luminescence, really good offensively. Another one is Unbound Freedom. Unbound Freedom is really good if you're playing melee cleaves against things like mages, because it makes it so your freedom lines up perfectly with the mage root, and it also gives you an undispellable freedom for yourself. That also gives you a speed boost by 30%, which is really good, especially as Rep Paladin, because you know, you're not the fastest for the most part. You do actually have decent mobility now with certain conduits, but yeah, Unbound Freedom is really good. Also, a cool tip is if you run it and you do not cast it on anyone else, only yourself, it is off global, which is kind of helpful in certain situations. Next up, another one that you can run is, I honestly think Lawbringer is not terrible anymore, especially if you're trying to cleave. I honestly think Lawbringer is not terrible right now, even though it got kind of nerfed since it doesn't do damage to your main target. But if you're kind of just cleaving the entire team and maximizing your stacks on everyone, it does really good damage. 10% of their max health as holy damage, that's pretty significant if you kind of think about it. Just because this doesn't hit your main target, it's kind of annoying. But if you play around it correctly, it can be good, especially if you're going for kind of a cleavy strategy against an entire team. But it's very situational, I'd have to say. Another one is Law and Order. Law and Order is really good if you're playing a comp that just, it's hard to apply slows to your main targets and you're playing something that can run really well. I like running it a lot of the time. It just makes it super consistent to slow things. I love it against hunters because a lot of times they do their disengage thing, they get their post-haste speed boost Then you just hit them with a Blade of Justice, and now they're slowed and they cannot get anywhere, and you just stick on them. Then the last other kind of potential one is Judgment of the Pure. It can be really good into mage teams or hunter teams, just teams that have a magic CC for your healer that it's hard to kind of avoid sometimes. The only problem is if you're playing in something like a Shadow Priest or an Ellie Shaman, they all have these really annoying dispel protections that you'll just be constantly triggering, and some of them are just going to be constantly killing yourself with, so kind of watch out. It could be also good against DK since the free poison dispel. It's just kind of situational. It can be really good against certain comps, but I feel like the main use of it is to get your healer out of CC. Those are pretty much your options for this last tier. It just kind of depends what you're playing against, what comp you're playing, just what you think you really need for the time. Alright, now let's talk about your rotation. Now your overall rotation is going to be pretty much the same, so let's just start with that. Your main playstyle is going to be trying to spend as much holy power as possible. If you're trying to do damage, you're going to want to be trying to get out as many Templars as possible. And if you're trying to heal, you're just going to try to get as many Wogs out as possible. Now we're just going to use this as Templars since, you know, we're hitting a training dummy. So you're either going to want to start with Judgment or Blade of Justice. Sometimes Judgment is first just because it has a larger range, but try to get Blade of Justice on cooldown as much as possible, since Blade of Justice is probably your #1 holy power generator, since it's the only ability that gives 2 holy power. Then Judgment, the big thing with Judgment is you want to keep it, you want to have it up every single time you click Templars, because when you cast Judgment, it puts a debuff on the target that causes them to take 25% increased damage for your next holy power ability. Crusader Strike is just kind of your filler. However, if you're in a situation where you have 3 or 4 holy power and you have 2 trays of Crusader Strike up, you're going to want to use that 1 Crusader Strike before you use your Templars, unless you're in a really tight situation where you could get a kill or you just need to spend that holy power right now, whether you're healing or something like that, because this prevents you from having gaps in your rotation for the most part, since getting it on cooldown as soon as possible makes it so that it'll come up off cooldown as soon as possible. Just trust me, it's really the most efficient way. So pretty much, you're gonna, let's just say you're starting with Blade of Justice, then you're gonna Judgment, then you're gonna probably Crusader Strike once, Templars, and then you're gonna Crusader Strike again. This ends up not being a perfect rotation, but Ret Paladin doesn't really have a perfect rotation. But for the most part, it's not gonna matter because you're gonna have other abilities that you can spend during those dead windows. You know, whether it be Hodge, or Slow, Cleanse, just all sorts of different things. Maybe you're just not going to be in range for certain things. You're really not going to notice the dead globals in your overall rotation when you're in an actual arena game or even RPG or anything like that, because you're not going to be able to just do your full PvP rotation at all times perfectly. But there are certain situations where you can just do a full-on rotation at all times, you know, because since when we mentioned earlier, you could be playing Divine Purpose, and you're always going to be playing Blade of Wrath. Blade of Wrath makes it so that your auto attacks have an increased chance of proccing Art of War, which resets the cooldown on Blade of Wrath and enhances the damage of it. This can really fill in the gaps in your rotation all the time, especially when you're playing Zeal, because Zeal makes it so that you auto attack 30% faster, which makes it so Art of War procs more often, which makes it so that you can click Blade of Justice even more, which makes it so that you have more holy power overall. Let me just give a priority on all of your abilities. So first off, you Blade of Wrath. Press it off cooldown pretty much, unless you have 4 or 5 holy power. But if you're at 4 or 5 holy power, then your #1 priority is Templars and or Wog. Then it is Judgment. You're gonna wanna use Judgment also off cooldown. If possible, you wanna make it so that you have the Judgment debuff on the target whenever you cast Templars. If you have 3 or 4 holy power and Blade of Wrath and Judgment are on cooldown, then you're going to want to press Crusader Strike. Then after that, if you have 5 holy power, or sometimes even 3 holy power, you're going to want to press Templar's Verdict. Then, for the rest of the time, if you have no other buttons to press, you're going to want to press Crusader Strike. Now, let's also talk about what happens if you have a Divine Purpose proc. In my opinion, you want to pair Divine Purpose procs with another Templar's Verdict. So you can press Templar's Verdict, let's say you drop down to 1 holy power. All your stuff's off cooldown right now, and you get a Divine Purpose proc. Either A, you can immediately click it again if you're doing pretty good damage, but if not, you could set up for the next one. You can then click Blade of Justice, get to 3 holy power, then you click Judgment, get to 4 holy power, then you click Crusader Strike, you get to 5 holy power, you Templars again. If Judgment's off cooldown again, I don't think it is, you click Judgment. If Blade of Wrath's off cooldown again, you click Blade of Wrath or Crusader Strike, and then you click your last Templars. This makes it that in a span of 4 globals, you're getting 3 Templars verdicts off, which can be a significant amount of damage even outside of a burst window. Now let's throw in Hammer of Wrath into the mix. So Hammer of Wrath can proc off of your Pressing Templar's Verdict if you're playing the Final Verdict Legendary, or if they're at 20% health. Now, Hammer of Wrath is your hardest hitting holy power generating ability apart from an Art of War Blade of Justice proc. Judgment has its own priority in the rotation, being that it applies the debuff to a target, increasing your next Templar's Verdict damage. So it has a higher priority than Blade of Wrath in my opinion, unless that global is either gonna kill or you think it's gonna be more valuable to do that tiny bit of extra damage than to enhance your next Templar's Verdict. But so for the most part, I would make it so that you use Hammer of Wrath in the windows that you would be using Crusader Strike. So it's just a slightly higher priority than Crusader Strike. Here's just an example of your basic rotation. So now let's talk about our burst windows. So our burst windows adds in 2 to 3 more abilities. One being Divine Toll, can give you anywhere between 1 to 5 holy power, depending on how lucky you are. But for this instance, we're just gonna be saying you're getting 5, even though it's not always like that. And then if you're playing Pelagos, it also increases your mastery, making it so your burst is significantly higher. Now, there are 2 other abilities you get. One being Final Reckoning, which is an AoE ability that you cast on the ground, and it hits everyone nearby for a large chunk of damage and increases the holy damage that they receive. And then the third ability that you get is Wake of Ashes. It's also a hard-hitting ability, but the main thing about it is it gives you 3 holy power. So that makes it really easy to chain a ton of Templars in a row, which is your main form of burst. When you burst, you're gonna either wanna be at 3 holy power when you start. For all my examples I'm going to be showing, I'm going to not be at it because I'm at the training dummies, so my Divine Toll is going to instantly give me 5 holy power anyways, because it bounces to all the targets. Yeah, so you have your wings up, you cast Divine Toll, it gives you X amount of holy power, hopefully enough for a Templar's Verdict. If you don't have enough for a Templar's Verdict, you're still going to follow that up with a Final Reckoning. Then, if you don't have enough for a Templar's Verdict, you're going to click Wake of Ashes. If you do have enough for a Templar's Verdict, you're going to click Templar's Verdict. And then, you're going to follow that up with a Wake of Ashes. Then, depending on your holy power, if you're at 1 holy power, you're going to want to use your Blade of Justice, and then Templars again. Then, you do Judgment into Hammer of Wrath, into Crusader Strike, into another Templars. Or if you get another Blade of Justice proc, you can use that instead of any of those abilities as well. Now here is an example of that. Now let's talk about what your burst window would be if you have Seraphim instead of Find Purpose. So it's going to be pretty similar. The only difference is you're going to want to get to 3 holy power beforehand. Then you're going to pop your Seraphim. Then you'll Wings, Divine Toll, drop your Final Reckoning. If you have enough holy power, you'll Templars. If not, you'll Wake of Ashes and then Templars. And then it's just your general rotation of trying to get as many Templars out as possible. Here is an example of that. And lastly, let's have our Divine Purpose plus Sanctified Wrath combo. You can either be at 3 holy power or 0 holy power. You're gonna go, you're gonna pop your wings, you're gonna press your Divine Toll, then you're just gonna try to get as many Templars out as possible. You're gonna hopefully be at 3 holy power at this point. If not, you're gonna Wake of Ashes and click Templars. If you are at 3 holy power, then you're just gonna Templars and then Wake of Ashes, and then you just go into your general rotation. Just try to get as many Templars out as possible. And that's about it. That is Rep Paladin's burst slash just general rotation. I hope that was helpful. Okay, so now let's just talk about a couple of abilities that I might not have mentioned beforehand. We already mentioned Blessing of Sacrifice and the uses of that. We also mentioned Blessing of Protection and some of the uses of that. However, there is one cool thing that I want to tell you about Blessing of Protection. If you are feared by a warrior, you're still able to cast it on your allies while you're inside that fear. I'm not sure why it works like this, because if you're hit by a physical stun, you can't cast it on your allies, but only during a warrior fear, you're able to cast it on your allies. Just a helpful tip. Now, the other important abilities that you should remember to use are Turn Evil. It's a cast that fears an undead, aberration, or a demon. Now, I'm pretty sure this doesn't work on Metamorphosis Demon Hunters for some reason. I don't know why, even though I think that they're considered a demon in that form. Either way, it does work on Lichbane Death Knights, so that's just a cool thing that you can remember. If they ever pop that to get out of a fear or anything, then you can Turn Evil them, and they're back in a fear. The notable things that you can cast it on in most arena games is if you see a Shadow Fiend from a priest, you can fear it, they won't get as much mana back, which can be pretty annoying to some priests. Another cool target is if you're against a BM hunter and they're playing an undead pet, you can cast it on them and it will cause them to be feared. If you're playing a BM hunter, don't play an undead pet into a Rep Paladin. There are tons of bad things that'll happen. There's that. When you click Wake of Ashes, they'll be stunned for 5 seconds. Just don't play an undead pet into Rep Paladins. It's just not a good idea. Another thing is you can fear pretty much every single Warlock pet, which can be really helpful during lots of times, especially if it's against a Demo Lock. You can fear some of the annoying pets. I'm not sure if it works on Tyrant, but I don't see why it wouldn't, which can be really helpful. Just shut down a Warlock burst right there. Or if you're playing against a Warlock who is using an Imp, you can fear the Imp before your go so that they can't dispel their healer or themselves out of any CC that you press on them. Or just, if you want to just peel a pet for any reason. It's a really helpful ability. Remember that you have it. You don't always have to use it, but it's just there. But yeah, that is gonna be it for kind of important abilities. Okay, next let's talk about Covenants. So for the most part, if you're playing Rep Paladin, you wanna go Kyrian. Kyrian's just overall really good, especially with Divine Toll, and then you got Pelagos, which gives you Combat Meditation. It's just really good. Kyrian is by far the superior Covenant for Rep Paladin right now. But other than that, the only other one that I would actually think about running is Necrolord. Necrolord makes you pretty tanky, so you won't die as fast, and their ability, Vanquisher's Hammer, makes it so that you have pretty consistent burst windows every 30 seconds rather than every minute. Then if you run the Legendary, you could have even more, but I don't think the Legendary is worth using. I think just Final Verdict is just so good that it's just not worth using anything else, except for maybe the Prot Lego against certain things like Rogue Mage, so you don't die in every single go. But for the most part, Pelagos is the play, especially right now until 9.1.5, where you can consistently change Covenants. There could be certain comps where certain other Covenants would actually be kind of nasty. As for the soul binds for the actual Covenant, you're going to be wanting to swap around between Pelagos and Mechanicos. Mechanicos is really just good against things like Rogue Mage. You can go a number of different things. You can go Clamps, you can go Sparkling Drifting Core, which is an AoE stun whenever you drop under 30% health, which can single-handedly win you games. I have lost so many games to this stupid ability. I hate it so much, so why not just use it yourself? Also, if you're playing in something with pets, you can play this. You can play it, and it'll make it so your Divine Toll comes up way faster than it would normally. But for the most part, just going to want to run it into things where you're going to get absolutely destroyed and you don't need the extra burst damage from Pelagos. Now let's talk about Conduits. So your best conduit, the number one thing that you need first off is Ring and Clarity. You want to get this thing as high eye level as possible, because the higher eye level it is, the higher chance it has to proc 3 times. I think you can probably get it to almost 75% if you have the highest conduit in the game right now, which is pretty impressive. That makes it so that your Divine Toll burst goes are just super consistent. The next potency conduit that you're going to want to get is Templar's Vindication. It is also insane. It makes it so that your Templars has a significant chance to proc for an extra 30% damage. That's pretty good. If you hit for a 20k, then you're hitting for an extra 6k after. That's over half someone's health right now. Yeah, but yeah, I think this one also honestly scales really hard with eye level. So I think you can get this to almost 70% also, which is absolutely insane because you're pressing Templar's Verdict all game long. The last potency conduit, it's not the best, but I'd say Virtuous Command is the next best one. It makes it so that some of your abilities have a chance to proc for an extra 12% additional damage. It's not the most noticeable thing, but it's not terrible, and Ret doesn't really have any other potency conduits that are worth running in my opinion. So yeah, you're kind of just stuck with that. So now let's talk about the endurance conduits. The number one endurance conduit that you're gonna have to go is Shielding Words. Shielding Words is amazing. It makes it so that whenever you cast Walk on yourself, you also get a shield for a % of how much of it healed. So how I have it right now, it's 25.5%. So if I walk for 10k, it gives me another 2500 shield. That turns the heal into a 12k heal. It's just a really good conduit, especially if you know that you're going to be getting trained a lot. The next best endurance conduit, and probably the only one that actually matters, other than Shielding Words, is Divine Call. So what this does is every X amount of time, whenever you get hit by an enemy, you reduce the cooldown of Divine Shield by 5 seconds. How often this procs varies depending on how high eye level the conduit is. I'm not sure how low you can get it right now, but let's just say that maybe you can get it to 30 seconds, which makes it so that every minute you get a 10-second reduction on your bubble. And so let's see, you got a 3.5 minute cooldown. So 3 minutes in, you are losing 30 seconds on the cooldown. So it'll turn into a 3-minute cooldown. That is pretty significant in my opinion. Reducing bubble cooldown by 30 seconds makes it pretty good. Like bubble on a 3-minute cooldown, that is absolutely insane. So yeah, this conduit is also really good. The only other one that is worth using, in my opinion, it is a very niche use too. It's only worth using if you're using the Reign of Endless Kings Legendary, which makes it so that when you drop below 20% health, you proc Ancient Kings for 4 seconds, reduces all damage on you by 50%. But the thing is, this conduit makes it so that when that also happens, you can cast Wog for free, which is pretty helpful. You know, you drop to 20% health, you're really low, so stat scales really well with your healing hands, and you're just gonna get a free Wog off. But yeah, it's only worth using if you have the Protection Legendary, otherwise it's really not. Now let's talk about Finesse. The one that I think that you should have all the time is Echoing Blessings. It makes it so that when you use Freedom, you get increased move speed when I think it's when it expires. Then for Blessing of Protection and Sacrifice, they also get a damage reduction when it expires. So you just get an extra 8% damage reduction or an 8% move speed, depending on what your eye level for the conduit is. But this one's really easy to get because you can buy it from the PvP vendor, which is very nice. This one kind of just depends. It's going to either be Pure Concentration, which makes it so that when you're in the concentration aura, all incoming fears are reduced by 30%. I think this one also scales pretty hard, so it could be really good in the future, or if you have a really high level version of it. But yeah, 30% reduced fear, so it's a 6-second fear. It is now a 4-second fear. That is pretty insane. I don't really recommend using Wretch Evil. It's pretty niche, in my opinion. The only other one that I recommend using is the Lights Burning. This makes it so that your Divine Steed has a 70% increased duration, and I think this one also scales pretty hard. So if you have a high level one, it would be closer to 100%. It'll make it so your Divine Steed now gives you almost 6 seconds of increased move speed, which is actually really insane. But yeah, that is pretty much it for Conduits. So now let's talk about Legendaries. So for the most part, there are only 2 Legendaries that I really recommend you getting. The first one is Final Reckoning. This is, in my opinion, the best offensive Legendary that Paladins have right now. It makes it so that whenever you cast Templar's Verdict, not only is it now considered a range ability and have a 10-yard range, but it also does 10% increased damage, and it also has a chance to proc your Hammer of Wrath, so that you can use it even if they're outside of execute range or if you're not using wings. It's just a really good Legendary, and it also makes it so you can use Templar's Verdict while disarmed. It's just insane in my opinion. The only other one worth using is a Protection Legendary, which is Reign of Endless Kings. This makes it so that when you drop below 20% health, you trigger Guardian of Ancient Kings for 4 seconds, and it's on a 45-second cooldown. What Guardian of Ancient Kings does is it reduces all damage you receive by 50%. Now, if you don't see how insane that is, it's pretty insane. You have it for every single burst window pretty much. This is on such a short cooldown. It's just kind of really good, especially against setup things like Rogue Mage or maybe Mage Shadow Priest. I really recommend getting this and using this Legendary. But yeah, that is gonna be it for today. I hope this was helpful for anyone. If there's anything I'm missing or if you have any other questions about Ret Paladin, just ask me in the comments. If it's something big, I'll add it into the next guide that I make for Ret Paladin. But yeah, thank you for watching. Peace.